Let's talk about a continent that used to be synonymous with war, and then just kind of stopped. Not because peace magically descended from the heavens, but because someone else took over the job of worrying. After World War II, Europe was done. Physically, emotionally, economically. The place was wrecked. Cities were rubble, millions were dead, and the will to fight was gone. So when the United States stepped in with money, troops, and promises, Europe didn't argue. It was exhausted, and America was offering something priceless: security. Washington wasn't doing this out of pure generosity. The Cold War was heating up fast, and Europe was ground zero. The US didn't want to see Western Europe fall into Soviet hands, so it did what it always does. It built bases, sent troops, signed treaties, and made itself the indispensable power on the continent. At the height of the Cold War, over 400,000 American troops were stationed in Europe. NATO was formed. Deterrence was outsourced. The deal was simple. The US would be the shield, and Europe could focus on rebuilding. Factories, roads, welfare states. It worked. Incredibly well, in fact. Western Europe boomed, standards of living skyrocketed, the welfare state expanded, and somewhere along the way, the idea of Europe as a military force just faded. And here's the thing no one really said out loud. America liked it that way. Sure, there was all the talk of alliance and partnership, but let's be honest, it suited Washington just fine if Europe wasn't too strong militarily. The US got to lead NATO without competition. It set the strategic tone. And when it needed international backing for some questionable intervention, a quiet Europe was helpful. Say a few nice things, maybe send a few troops, and the mission looked global. Europe, for its part, leaned in. Defence budgets dropped, militaries shrank, training exercises were cut back. The muscle, once honed by centuries of war, started to atrophy. And let's not forget, military might requires constant exercise. Just like a muscle, if you don't use it, you lose it. Europe wasn't just skipping gym day. It forgot where the gym even was. By the 1990s, the Cold War was over. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The threat seemed gone. The peace dividend kicked in. Welfare spending increased. Universities expanded. The average citizen looked at the future and saw not tanks but trains. Europe was building a different kind of power. Soft power. Economic integration. Diplomacy. Development aid. And for a while that felt like enough. But military power, that became something for the Americans. It was their thing, their obsession, their budget line. Europeans, by and large, rolled their eyes. To them, US militarism looked like a relic of a past era, a holdover from an empire unwilling to age gracefully. This was especially true in public opinion. Poll after poll showed that most Europeans didn't see military spending as a priority. In many countries, defence was considered a political third rail. You cut pensions, people riot. You cut tanks. Most people don't even notice. Even as American leaders began sounding the alarm, Clinton quietly, Bush with frustration, Obama with polite firmness, and Trump with full-volume threats. Europe shrugged. It didn't seem necessary. The world looked mostly stable, and the threats that did exist, terrorism, piracy, cyber attacks, didn't seem like the kind of thing you fought with tanks and fighter jets. In 2014, only a handful of NATO members were meeting the 2% of GDP defence spending target. Germany, the continent's economic powerhouse, was spending closer to 1.2%. Its military was underfunded, undertrained, and in some cases literally falling apart. Stories circulated of soldiers using broomsticks to simulate rifles during exercises. It's not that Europeans were pacifists, they just believed their moment had arrived. A moment of permanent peace, multilateralism, and post-historical politics. War was something other people did, and if push ever came to shove, well, the Americans would handle it. But what Europe didn't fully reckon with is that their safety net was American power. And as the US began to focus more on Asia, more on domestic problems, and more on the limits of its own global reach, the old assumptions started to crack. and then Russia invaded Ukraine. Suddenly tanks weren't so outdated, air defence systems weren't abstract budget items. The idea that borders could change by force wasn't some 20th century ghost. It was happening, right next door. European governments scrambled. Defence budgets were revised. Germany announced a €100 billion special fund for its military. Sweden and Finland abandoned decades of neutrality. NATO felt alive again. But rebuilding a military force isn't just about money. It's about culture, doctrine, supply chains, personnel, and time. This is the challenge Europe now faces. After decades of strategic outsourcing, can it rebuild its own capacity? Can it relearn the basics of military power? Not just spending more, but thinking differently about its place in the world? It's not just about deterring Russia. It's about becoming a serious actor in a world that's getting less peaceful, less predictable, and less forgiving of complacency. Europe didn't become weak by accident. It became weak by design, because the post-war order allowed it to. That order is now eroding. And the question is no longer whether Europe wants to be a military power again. It's whether it still remembers how. And this brings us back to the muscle. Military capability isn't something you can just buy off the shelf. It's built over years, through training, discipline, institutional memory, and yes, a willingness to engage with the world's uglier sides. Like a muscle, it needs repetition, pressure, even occasional strain to grow stronger. Europe hasn't just neglected the gym, it forgot the movements entirely. Now it's rushing back onto the treadmill, trying to regain balance, strength, and stamina. But regaining lost muscle takes time. And in geopolitics, time is a luxury you don't always have.